Congressman Seth Moulton is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. A Marine who is now a political veteran. The North Shore Democrat looks for consensus in a divided Washington. How he's navigating election year politics. The Congressman's in the chair. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR, everyone. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Sharman Saketi. It's great to have you with us this morning. As you can see, with us at the table is Congressman Seth Moulton, who has represented the state's 6th district since 2015. It's great to have you with us, sir. Thanks for your time.
Good to be back.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with the conviction of former President Donald Trump. A Manhattan jury finding him guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money trial. Trump says the trial was rigged. I have to ask you, do you think this is going to make a difference to the people who support him, and what kind of impact do you see for the presidential election?
I don't think it will make a difference to the people who already support him. But for the undecided voters, we know from some polling that some small percentage of them will actually have, this does matter to them. And ultimately, that could affect a close election. I mean, this is still a frighteningly close election based on the polls that we have today. A lot of polls even have Biden a little bit down. So Democrats have a lot of work to do, and the stakes just got a lot higher.
So this will really probably make the MAGA base dig in a little bit more. But what do Democrats have to do?
Well, we have to really remind people that we should not have a convicted felon running for president. We have to remind people just how bad Trump was 4 years ago because, hindsight always looks better, right? And we have to remind our voters that they need to show up for President Biden. I mean, we have a lot of the Democratic base upset about the war in Gaza, for example, but Trump would be immeasurably worse for the Palestinians in Gaza. And so this does come down to a choice between a lifelong public servant and a convicted felon.
So do you fear that the bitterness of this political divide could lead to violence?
Yes, I do.
You do?
I do, candidly.
And what about the Mass GOP pointing out that the Federal Election Commission, this is an interesting point, the Federal Election Commission and the Justice Department both investigated this and chose not to bring charges. Should it have ended there?
Investigated
the hush money and the trial and all that?
No, I mean, look, if I had done this as a congressman, I'd be out in a heartbeat. I mean, a lot of people are trying to minimize this on the Republican side of the aisle. These are supposedly conservative values leaders in the Republican Party who now are standing behind a president accused of paying off and convicted of paying off a porn star. I mean, this is just a new level of absurdity.
Well, you serve in the House. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, he called Trump's conviction a weaponization of the justice system. If the man second in line to the presidency doesn't believe in the fairness of this system, what does that say?
Well, you're assuming that he doesn't believe in the fairness and not that he's just lying for political gain.
And that's
the
what
reality.
You say he is
That's
doing.
the reality. Is I see these Republicans, including Mike Johnson, in the locker room at the House gym, and you know what they talk about in the locker room? How ridiculous Donald Trump is, and then they get up on TV and defend him. It's pathetic.
So are you saying the speaker is lying for political gain?
Well, what I'm saying is that we don't know. You never know what these guys are saying. You never know whether they're telling the truth, whether they actually believe this, or whether they're just parroting whatever Donald Trump told them to say last night.
How do the Democrats position themselves? I know you say you want to remind people that, that Trump is what he is, but how do the Democrats say there's a reason to vote for me, and it's not just because I'm not Trump?
Well, Sharman, it's a great question because there's two things. First of all, we need to have a positive agenda. We need to talk about what President Biden is going to do in his second term. And we have problems in America, We've got problems right here in Massachusetts. So we need to talk about the future. How are people going to be able to afford better housing? How are we going to get grocery prices to go down? How are we going to protect our borders? Because we clearly have a border crisis that the Republicans refuse to deal with in the Senate. How are we going to fix the problem of guns in schools? Let's lay out a positive agenda. But the other thing Democrats, I think, really need to do, and this is maybe a little bit more controversial, is we need to look ourselves in the mirror and say, why on earth is this even close? One of the American political parties is in a civil war playing out across the country, though it's come to a head in the House of Representatives where we didn't even have a speaker for 3 weeks, something that's never happened before in American history. And it's led by a convicted felon. And yet we're not cleaning up. I mean, we should be winning every race.
Why would that be? What does Seth Moulton think that is?
I think we've lost touch with a lot of American voters. I think that in some ways we've become the party of the ultra rich and the ultra poor. We've lost touch with a lot of people in the middle. People think we're more concerned about offending people than doing things to improve their lives. We need to look ourselves in the mirror as Democrats and say, how can we do better?
So one of the things you were talking about, the number of issues that face Americans, that face all of us, the migrant crisis, the shelter crisis, continues to dominate local politics particularly. Now, I don't know if you heard it, but this is what Governor Healy had to say after state police were called to deal with an incident at Logan Airport last week. Here's what the governor said.
Look, I've said from the beginning that we don't want families staying at Logan Airport. We continue to call on Congress to act, to deal with what's happening at the border in terms of reform here. Again, we're focused on calling on Congress to act.
So I know you can understand the frustration, and everywhere we turn, the answer we frequently hear is this is a federal problem. This is a federal problem. This is a federal problem. So what's your response?
It's a federal problem with real local impacts. I see this down the street where my family lives in Salem. So we have to deal with this. We've had a compromise border bill in the Senate now for several months that Republicans refuse to vote on, even though the Republicans negotiated it. Why? Because Donald Trump said, don't support border reform. I want to run on it. I want to make it an election issue. So there's clearly a federal problem. I can say we've also pushed the governor to do things like make sure we can get these folks who are here able to work more quickly. And her administration has been taking that advice and trying to do more here at the local level. But we can't just keep spending Massachusetts taxpayer dollars on supporting everyone who shows up at our doorstep.
Do you think the benefits that Massachusetts offers makes the state more attractive to people?
Yes. And we've had that tough conversation as a delegation with Biden administration officials in Washington. Like the whole delegation sitting in a room and saying, you know, we've got to deal with this. And the number one issue is we've got to stop people from coming over the border. That should be obvious to everybody. But the other thing is we got to think about here in Massachusetts, we have amazing principles and values. I just spent a lot of time yesterday at a food pantry, or a few days ago at a food pantry, and we want to support everyone in our community who needs help. But we also don't want to have a flashing sign, you know, so bright that people down in Mexico can see it that says, just come to Massachusetts and you're going to get a free ride.
So everyone knows that you are a Marine. You saw combat in Iraq. You serve in the Armed Services Committee. We know that weapons made here in the United States were used in an Israeli airstrike in Rafah that killed dozens of civilians. What is your response to that and the current U.S. policy that's concerning the war in Gaza?
This is exactly why President Biden said that not only should you not go into Rafah, but he's going to stop providing certain types of weapons to Israel. And there is a real important nuance here. Some people want to just cut off all support of Israel, our most important ally in the Middle East. I think that what the president is doing is actually very measured and very smart, because he's saying we want Israel to have defensive weapons, like the weapons that really prevented a major war with Iran, because Israel was able to defend itself from Iran's major attack. But at the same time, we're not just going to give them 2,000-pound dumb bombs to drop on cities in Gaza and inevitably kill a lot of civilians.
I don't want to blend two conflicts, but the president is allowing Ukraine to use weapons made here against Russia on Russian soil, only in limited circumstances right now. What is your impression of that? Do you support that?
It's the right thing. I pushed the administration to do this. I think they should have done it some time ago. And we're actually following a lot of European nations, even France and Germany, who have already agreed to allow the Ukrainians to do this. But by the way, just think about these major foreign policy challenges. Do you want a convicted felon making these decisions as commander-in-chief? I don't think whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you want that for the safety of our country.
All right, you're also a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. There is some growing concern about air safety during this busy travel season. Last week, an American Airlines flight that was bound for Boston had to slam on the brakes during takeoff at Reagan National to avoid a private jet that was landing. Now, the FAA continues to face a nationwide shortage in air traffic controllers, and they have put down new rules. But how concerned are you about this situation?
I'm very concerned. I fly between Boston and Washington all the time, and National Airport is incredibly congested. So we do need to crack down on safety. I mean, you don't even know if you're getting on an airliner today whether the door is going to blow out at 30,000 feet. But one other thing, any other developed country in the world, you wouldn't even think about flying between Boston and Washington, because you'd get on a high-speed train that would get you there in 3 hours with never a weather delay, every 15 minutes. That is the future. Not better safety for aircraft, although yes, we have to get there. I want to go on a really nice high-speed train that's on time every single time. Not stuff myself in a pressurized aluminum tube 30,000 feet in the air and just pray that we don't crash into another plane or lose a door halfway through the flight.